So hello everybody and welcome to the Beautiful Feelings Within webinar series, and this is our third episode, and we're really fortunate to be joined with Jess this evening. I'm going to let Sarah and Jess introduce themselves, but for anybody who hasn't met me yet or doesn't know who I am, I'm Anthony, and I work with Sarah and Jess in a specialist eating disorder service, but I think we all have our own private practices, and mine's before thought. But so we're all here together today and to explore the topic of eating disorders, and we've framed it as an inside-out perspective. So I'll hand over and just let Sarah and Jess also introduce themselves.
So I'm Sarah. I'm a therapist working alongside Anthony and Jess in specialist eating disorder service and in my own private practice. And yeah, here to share what we see, but also hear what you see too. So let's just make it a shared experience tonight. And Jess, wonderful.
Hi, Hi everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here as part of the conversation. I've been meaning to come to the other one, so I do apologise. You'll hear it's the bedtime hour in my house, so if you hear chaos, it's because it is. But hi, so I'm Jessica Crawley, and as Anthony and Sarah have mentioned, we work together in a specialist eating disorder service, and I'm a dietitian by background. And now also venturing into the world of health coaching, but maintaining my identity as dietetics within that. Just because I still find it helpful, but I'll talk a little bit more about sort of my journey with my relationship with my thinking about dietetics today, because it feels relevant. It feels relevant to this conversation. So yeah, really, really happy to be here, share how things look to me, and really interested to hear how it lands with people and you know what's showing up for you guys too.
Brilliant, thanks, Jess. So yeah, so please, we were happy to kind of share some of our stories and insights, but I guess like Sarah and Jess are saying, like we love for people to just join in and discuss, ask questions. Like I think it's so rich to kind of hear from everybody, and I think we really love that as well, hearing everybody's journeys in life too. And
it doesn't need to be formal. You don't need to put your hand up or just unmute yourself and just say it, speak it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just had it delivered from the side, look. My butler's just arrived with a drink for me. Oh, right.
Say that there's also total bedtime carnage going on in our house on the other side of a wall, so really sorry if that infiltrates.
That's fine, no problem.
Absolutely fine, Abby. We like a bit of carnage.
So it's an interesting story in a way that all three of us have ended up here tonight talking about something like eating disorders, because we've all been working together in different ways and roles in the service we work in, and I think our own sort of understanding of eating disorders has evolved and developed within that time too, I would say. I remember first joining the service and with you, Sarah, in fact, wasn't it? And my kind of learning of what eating disorders are has really been influenced by working with people in the service, I would say. And I think my sort of experience has been that what starts off as all the visible stuff people share in terms of what we're doing moment to moment, in terms of our behaviours, and all of what we hear about eating disorders in the news has moved deeper and deeper into kind of actually what's going on internally for us all in a given moment. That's been my sort of journey in a way of my own learning in terms of all of the hidden thoughts and feelings that are going on for people that we probably wouldn't even know in a way. And more, as we have kind of learned more about our own minds, I think it's led us here, hasn't it, Sarah, to want to come in and share a little bit more about our learning and what we've seen working with people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really sorry. The butler's drilling in the background. He's a multitasking butler. But bear with me, I'll talk over him. Yes, where were we, Anthony? So I guess for me, what's been really interesting to see was that we all came to the service in our own little niches, didn't we? And Anthony is a mental health nurse, me as a therapist, Jess is a dietitian, and we were all kind of heading in the same direction, but with a different message. And I guess what we do now is very similar. We're heading in the same direction, thank goodness, but we kind of share a very similar message, not because we all are the same, but because as human beings, we're all the same, aren't we? We all work in the same way. We all show up in the same way. And I guess the three of us along this journey through the last 3 years together have really seen something different. And I guess that's where you come in, Jess, with, you know, where this all started. Because I remember not long after you came across this understanding, Jess, being in the office, I don't know if you remember this, and coming up to me and saying, knowing that I had anorexia in the past, and saying to me, do you know what, Sarah, has anybody else ever asked you if eating disorders even exist? Because what you were seeing, I think, was, do you know what, it's just a whole collection of thoughts that we make into a thing. And I guess that's kind of an indicator of where we come from nowadays.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's not to say it's not experienced as a real thing, but when you actually try and say, hey, what is it? Like Anthony said, we often find ourselves describing it in the way that it shows up. So in the way that it manifests in physical behaviors, in the way that it manifests in physical symptoms, because they're easily things that our mind can see, that our brains can go, oh, that's what it is, but it never really captures the essence of what's going on for someone. It only, like Anthony said, it only captures what's showing up in that present moment. And where we've all started to look is so much deeper than that, because it helps us to make so much more sense of it. And like I was saying, it doesn't mean I've stopped practicing dietetics with people. It's just the way that I practice dietetics is so different, because the starting point is different. The starting point is a place of clarity and seeing, oh, actually, I see what's going on here. I see what that person's missing. I see the misunderstanding. Perhaps there's an opportunity to point them in a direction that will lead them back to the truth of who they are. Because what they're experiencing right now, yes, it's manifesting in lots of ways that are causing harm and are being experienced as super real, but it's not who they are, ever.
Can I just jump in? Sorry. I was just going to say, it's really interesting that you said, have you ever wondered if eating disorders actually exist? Because, so, you know, I have a diagnosed eating disorder, and putting that label in it at one point was really helpful in sort of, I suppose, making me feel like, oh, hang on, this is a thing that you can, like, people get. This is an illness, and like people can help you with this. That was really wonderful thing to hear, that it wasn't just me, that I was just broken. It was a thing. But at the same time, there are days, especially now I'm further on in recovery, where I sort of think, I don't think I really have an eating disorder. I haven't really had many other thoughts today. Like, I'm all right. And I think, you know, and then there are other days when I'm like, my head is a mess of it all. But I think I like the idea that it is just a collection of thoughts, because then on days where you have fewer of them, you don't necessarily have to think, oh no, but I have to have these disorder thoughts, otherwise I don't have an eating disorder. You know, it's sort of, yeah, stepping away from the identity and seeing it as a collection of thoughts allows for that kind of ebb and flow, and yeah, I don't know, for a little bit less of the black and white thinking, which if you have an eating disorder, you're fairly prone to anyway. Yeah, I don't know, that was an interesting.
I love that, Abby, because actually it really shows the transient nature of our experience, that actually we're not in that eating disorder thinking all of the time. We might be in it quite a lot of the time sometimes, but it really shows how it can't be who we are, because we're not always in that thinking.
I remember, oh sorry, go on, Abby.
No, I was just going to say, it's, I always find it helpful to see it as like a tug of war, and to think, well, even on those dark days, if you feel there's a bit of tug of war in your mind, who is it on the other end of the rope? Again, you know, if the eating disorder is on one end, who is it that's pulling the other end of the rope? And then I find it helps because you can even, you know, just even if it's a very feeble pull, there's somebody there. Yeah, sorry, Anthony, go for it.
No, yeah, that's a really good point. I remember years ago, I started off my first job was working in CAMS. It just so happened to be, after I'd done all my student nurse training, the first job I got was on an eating disorder ward for children and adolescents. So my sort of initial learning all about how to help people with eating disorders was, I guess, very medical based. And I remember like hearing about all these statistics and all of these different types of eating disorders. And it's almost like the people working there were also this kind of image of it being really hard, this journey of recovery from an eating disorder, particularly that they used to say things like with anorexia that like there's only 50% of people who get so far, and then there's only so much more statistically that fully recover. And all of this is like in the minds of all the professionals that I'm working with. Innocent, and that's what like all my learning initially was. And then so when I was sitting down with people, I had in my mind like that they've got this really arduous journey ahead of them, that people struggle immensely. And I remember them saying it's got, out of all of mental health, it's got the highest mortality rates, understandably, because I think it has such a big impact on our physical health at times. But also kind of like, almost like, it's so much harder to work with people. I don't know if this was an exact message I got, and maybe you can say from your perspective, Sarah, but that not only are you trying to help someone with their mental health in terms of their mood and all of the emotions that are going on, but also sometimes it felt that sense from staff was that they're not wanting to kind of, for that to change almost. Mm. And so all of my initial thinking was building up in this way about how it felt to work in that way. Do you know what I mean?
Mm. And I think that speaks to something about what Jess was kind of making a nod to, the idea of, you know, starting from a different point, because what we start with, or traditionally what we've started with, is seeing what we see. You know, the physical state of somebody, you know, experiencing the stories that are going on in their minds about who they are or how they are. And actually, when we only see that, we miss a human being that has the ability to get up each morning, has the ability to get through a day. We miss a big piece of magic in front of us. And I guess we also miss, you know, something that we hear fairly often is, well, this person says that they want to recover, and yet all their behaviours are saying that they don't. And for me, what I see in that is, this person says they want to recover, and all their behaviours say they've got a lot of tricky thinking that is terrifying to them. Jess.
Yeah, and something that's coming up for me from but what you said, Abby, what you said, Anthony, and then how you brought that together, Sarah, is this idea of what reality is, right? So when I was the same as you, Anthony, I was hearing all these stories of what eating disorder recovery was like. And it, in a way, it meant I became binary in my thinking. It meant that I was like, oh, well, I'm going to have to point this person in the direction of what is happening and tell them how what their experience isn't real. It's not reality. It's not reality that you can live off that many calories. It's not reality that you can eat in that way and be well, because we would say they've got a distorted version of reality. And so my time would be spent trying to persuade someone, and that's how it felt. I tried to persuade someone that their reality was distorted, whereas now I'm like, oh, that's your reality. Well, here's mine. And hey, why don't we talk about how we all experience reality? And what you were saying, Abby, about that tug of war, what that does is it invites in a third person, because if it invites in a third perspective, and a perspective that brings us all together as humans, a perspective that's an equalizer for all of humanity, that goes, hey, what if you're having a really human experience and mistaking it for a fixed reality that can't change? It's not my job to persuade you that my reality is the truth, but let's look at something that's true beneath all of it.
And what is true beneath all of it for you, Jess? What do you see? What is?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that changed for me, and the real privilege of working in an eating disorder recovery focused way, or working in an eating disorder service, was the biggest thing that's changed for me is seeing the body and the mind as two separate things. I used to really believe that the mind was one thing and the body was another. And what I see now is they're all one system. It's all the same thing. And both the body and the mind are not who we are. They're how we show up and have a human experience. They're what brings to life, the part of what brings to life our experience for us. So what's true, the truth that I see that connects us all as humans is that underneath our stories, underneath our experience, underneath our bodies, there is something. I call it well-being. I call it our diamond, the truth of who we are. There is something that is unbreakable, cannot be lost, cannot be broken, cannot be damaged. There is something that is observing, watching, holding space for all of this experience to unfold. And that is the truth of who we all are as humans, all of us. And we can innocently, because we've got this thing called a brain that's always trying to make meaning, always trying to find out, you know, how to get back to a good feeling, that knows, our brain knows on some level that well-being is who we are in our innate state, this diamond, this unbreakable essence. Our brain knows that, and so it's always searching for it, and it can so innocently attach what we're doing, who we're with, what we're eating, because we have a biological effect on food, right? All those things, it can so innocently attach those things to being the truth of who we are, or a feeling that we're looking for, because it knows that deep down we are this feeling, this essence, this diamond, this well-being that is free to experience all of the things that come with being a human being. So yeah, that's changed everything for me, because what it's enabled me to do is to see that all anybody is ever experiencing in and amongst having an eating disorder is a simple misunderstanding of the truth of who they are, or that their well-being is at risk somehow, or that there's just some sense of misunderstanding of how their experience is showing up for them, basically, and being able to observe that without a place of fear, but from a real place of hey, I can see what's going on here, and I'd love to offer you an explanation that might help. To me, it's just filled with so much hope, just filled with so much joy, so much potential. It's not up to me if people see it, but I know that it resonates with people on some level, because like I said, our brain knows, and we all know deep down that it's true.
So Jess, if somebody were to say to you, because I think this is sometimes for some people, especially carers that we speak to, a really tricky thing to kind of comprehend. If somebody that they love is looking really poorly, really emaciated, and you say, yeah, but they've got health. And they say, what are you talking about? Can you talk a bit more to that?
Yeah. Well, I'd be asking them to think about how it feels in their body to feel the thinking of this person in front of me is X, Y, or Z. And often the feeling is panic, fear, terror. And then I ask them what their understanding of that feeling is. And then I might say, okay, now what if that's all that's going on in this person too? And they're innocently mistaking that for being something that won't pass on its own, that won't change, that is fixed, that is stuck, and they have to search for something to help them to get a better feeling. What if that's what's going on here? What do you know to be true? Like, what is this feeling that's showing up in you? Is that who you are? Or is that something you experience? What do you know to be true about that? Because I think that we can get really caught up with trying to exchange the experience of others around us, when really we all just need to start by looking at ourselves and what's true for us. Because if we can start to get a feeling for this for ourselves, that we experience fear, that we experience terror, that we experience joy, that we experience elation, and yet we are none of those things, it makes it much easier to be with someone who's going through those things, and it changes the way you show up with them. Because if I show up from a place of fear and terror, you're going to feel it, right? We feel each other's feelings as humans. We're co-regulatory. Our nervous systems feel each other. They feel what each other are doing. And you know, in order for someone to land in a place of safety, I need to be in a place of safety myself. And that is the essence of what we are. This feeling, it's not even a feeling, it's before all feeling. We are safety, we are well-being, we are a diamond.
And I guess there's something about the wisdom of the system in that when we're feeling afraid, or when our bodies are looking like they're really struggling to keep going, there is a message there for us all to hear and to see. Maybe this isn't quite the best for us. And yet we ignore that message often. And I think what I'm hearing in you is, let's get curious about the wisdom of this system.
Yeah. Let's go back to where this is coming from.
Yeah.
And what's covering it up, because that's actually what's happening. And when we see that it's simply something that's being covered up and not something that some people will find and others won't, some people have more of than others, you know, that's not what we're saying here. We're saying as human beings, we all have the same amount of well-being innately and a capacity to cover it up in different ways. That's so different from the traditional conversation of some people are more resilient than others, some people stand a better chance of recovery than others. Our life experiences are what's going to dictate our potential in life. That's the common conversation, and we're saying, hey, no. What if that's not true?
Yeah. And what if what you've been searching for is already in you? What if recovery is already there? What if you are already in that space? You just haven't realised.
Or you're not taking action from what that space tells you to do when it shows up, right? Because I've not ever met anyone in recovery from an eating disorder who hasn't had a thought about food. Who hasn't had a thought about eating, who has, you know, actually it's pretty much all that's going on. How wise is that the system will send us what we need? What's the where we start meddling with it is what we do when it shows up. We ignore it, or we make meaning of it in a different way.
It's almost the interpretation of it, isn't it? Because I remember when I was in the midst of my eating disorder, that idea of my brain constantly wanting food, constantly thinking of food, meant to me at that time, without this understanding, that oh my God, it's tricking me into putting weight on. It's tricking me. How can a body know how to trick us? A body is just trying to stay alive, right? And yet when we misinterpret that signal, we start to get into sticky situations. We resist the wisdom that shows up for us.
I think that would probably be one of the more significant parts of my learning, that 3 years ago, I heard this term innate health, and it struck me that I'd never heard of this in mental health services before, innate health. Because I'd always been thinking about people with mental illness and a sense of them, like at some point in our lives, we lose mental health. And when we've lost mental health, we struggle and all of these problems arise. And so we have to help people find it again or regain it. And I think to hear that this opposite way of thinking about it, oh, hang on a minute, health is just innate within us, was like a revelation to me. I hadn't seen it yet, but just the fact that I'd heard something different was huge, because it sparked my curiosity of wanting to look into that a bit more. And this is when you, Jess, were in the team, and you'd come in one day having read Michael Neill's book, and then it's like all the stress and worry from you just disappeared overnight. And I was like, whoa, what on earth's going on there? So I couldn't work that one out. Well, like all the therapies I've seen where people go from this process to that process, it's like months and months of just trying to get a goal. You know, I have achieved like this small step, and then you walk into the office like beaming with joy. You found happiness. pure unadulterated happiness overnight.
And I was like, whoa, this just makes life make sense. So for me, the biggest tug of war, I love that analogy that you use, Abby, it keeps coming up. The biggest fight in my head that I always had was, why is it that, so I'll go back a step. So my sister had an eating disorder when she was an adolescent, and me and my sister are so similar and so different. So we're good at the complete opposite ends of the scale. I went down the science and academia route. She's super creative. She's an amazingly talented hairdresser. She was like on an arts team in London, and like she's just incredible at it. Give me a head of hair, and I'm like, wouldn't have a clue what to do with it. So we're so similar, but we show up so different, and yet the world was always telling us how different we were. And I was always just like, I don't get that, because what I see what's the same about us, and I've always seen what's the same about us, and yet the world keeps telling me that we're so different and that we can measure success in different ways, and that, you know, this version is better than that version. And it was the same that was happening with my clients. I was showing up and service users at work, and I was like, I really struggle to see the difference between you and I. I'm really struggling to see this here. And yet you're showing up with these really, really tricky presentations, these really, really tricky behaviors that are having such an impact on your life. Life just isn't working with the same ease for you. And yet there's so much similar between us. And I just couldn't figure out what it was. And then this understanding came along, and I was like, oh, right. That's what it is. It's because beneath all of that nonsense, like beneath all of that stuff that the world is currently telling us means something, there's something so much deeper than that is true for all of us. And I just love how this understanding is. And so for me, it was just like so much got lifted away. I was like, what a relief that as human beings we all have an innate capacity for well-being. What a relief. I don't have to carry around so much worry anymore about the things that I'm seeing that are going wrong in the world. And that's not to say that I don't want to change things that are going wrong in the world. Of course I do, but the motivation just came up from a totally different place. It's like the carer that we were talking about, Sarah and I. Instead of trying to do things from fear and trying to change things because this is wrong, it was like, oh, let's just point people to what makes sense, and change will happen naturally.
And you use the word motivation, Jess, and that's something that I really find has changed the way I talk about it, because I think in most services, physical and mental health services, I think we talk about the importance of motivation to change and the desire to create something different. And motivation is simply thought. And because it's thought, it's transient. So it's not going to be there all the time. So what do we do when we're not feeling particularly motivated? Because does that mean we can stop? We have to stop recovery until that motivation shows up again? Well, no, of course it doesn't. We don't need motivation to make changes. Kind of makes it a bit easier, doesn't it? If we can see that we want to do it and we can move forward. But I guess, and I'm really sorry, I'm not great. I'm going to use a very crude example. I'm not very motivated to go to the loo, but if my bladder tells me I need a wee, I don't have much choice, Lucy, I'm sorry. I don't have much choice but to go for a wee, motivation or not. And our bodies are showing us that, and it's easy to listen to my bladder. It's not quite so easy when we have a lot of thinking about, you know, whether we should go for a wee or not, whether we should eat or not, what our weight should be.
And if someone says to me, I'm not motivated to eat right now, my eating disorder is really strong, I say, well, you're motivated not to eat, so don't tell me you don't have motivation.
I love that, Jess.
There's motivation here. Like, let's not define one thing by one behavior. Motivation exists. Look how motivated not to eat you are. Motivation is within you. It's emerging within you. It's just emerging in you in one direction. So where is it coming from? Whichever direction it's going in, it's coming from the same place. And actually what I've started to notice is there's a type of motivation before that. So when we are residing in our well-being, when we are connected, when we are noticing the diamond that we are, at times we can feel really motivated to do something from there. At times it can be super, super quiet, right? It can be super, super quiet. But at times I've never met anybody who's come across this understanding and said, yeah, and I don't want to do anything, because being in your well, like not I don't want to do anything, but I just, what I mean, because they might want to be still for a while. What I'm saying is there's a natural sense of motivation that comes from being connected to your well-being, because it's the motivation for life. It's the motivation to be alive. It's that feeling of aliveness, which comes hand in hand with motivation, because that's simply it. Look to nature to see it in action, right? Nature is motivated towards life. It adapts in the most amazing ways all of the time, because it's always motivated for life. And so that is an innate quality in all of us.
And I think what I'm hearing in that, Jess, is there's a real difference between the motivation that is always there and working for us, and the motivation that we sometimes feel that we've got to conjure up in our minds.
Yeah. And that's the tricky thing. And it comes down to what Anthony was saying when he said, oh, hang on a minute, this is something that is innate. For me, one way of looking at it is conditional and unconditional. It's an unconditional motivation. It's a motivation just because, full stop. It's a motivation, you know, an acorn doesn't go into the ground and go, oh, I really hope I get to make it to an oak tree. It's motivated just because. It's motivated just because it's an acorn, right? Yeah, so, yeah. That's how it looks to me. Oh, and then there's the conditional type. I'll be motivated to get a new job. I'm motivated if I get the car. It's attached to something. Well, if it's attached to something, it's coming from thought, because these innate qualities are unconditional. They don't depend on anything. So,
sorry, can I say something?
You can, Abby. You don't need to ask. Go for it.
It's interesting about motivation, because so I've got 2 little children, and at the sort of in the earlier stages of recovery, when I certainly didn't have much connection to my innate anything, I wouldn't have known it was there at the time. My kind of children were a big external motivating factor, I suppose, you know, at a very basic kind of survival level. Like, they need me. Whether I want to do this or not, I have to do this. I am motivated because I don't, you know. And I kind of, and that, you know, it was really helpful at first. And there were people who sort of said, at some point though, you'll need to find the motivation within you. You'll need to find motivation to survive, even if nobody else, you know, in the world existed. And I just thought, well, I'll never get to that point. I'll always need an external motivator. And I kind of used my children's motivation to survive. And then I then had another baby, and I used the fact that I wanted to breastfeed him that was motivation to eat then, you know, because it felt worth it if I was giving it to him, if it was, you know. And then it was kind of motivation, well, now I want to kind of be present with them, I want to be engaged with them. And then I reached a point where I could do all those things. I was well enough to know that actually my illness wasn't impacting them anymore. And I got stuck a bit. I got stuck for quite a long time, because I sort of thought, well, it's almost indulgent or unnecessary to kind of rock the boat anymore and push on. That feels selfish, because that's just for me. But I think, yeah, having kind of explored a bit, you know, I suppose, yeah, started to connect with you guys at Connect. I think it did come a bit, it was, yeah, I feel like there was a bit of being that acorn, that it was just at that point I took over, and it was just a sort of, yeah, but I want to live, like I want to actually live, not just kind of exist and not exist for other people. I want to live, and I want to be me. And I think at that point it was all about boosting the bits of me that weren't for anybody else, and they may have benefited them as a byproduct, as like a useful extra, but they weren't for anybody else. And I could have, you know, I could have survived and I could have lived a perfectly fine life before, but I feel like at the moment I'm working to kind of almost, let the motivation do its thing, and not kind of like, right, I've got to find it, I've got to dig deep, I've got to channel it. It's just like, I feel like just that acorn, it's like, well, I'll just kind of, if I just do what I need to do to nourish myself, I'll just kind of grow without having to kind of force it. So that's what I'm trying to kind of feel like I'm in that phase now, where I'm trying to just let the inner motivation do its thing.
How's that going, Abby? How does that feel to you?
Some days it feels brilliant and really kind of empowering and exciting and hopeful. And some days I feel like, some days I let my thinking about how deserving I am of certain things make it harder to let it be.
It's changeable.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you've kind of stepped back from your attachment to the need to have it constant.
Yeah, exactly. I think like we were saying at the beginning, where you know that there could be days where you don't necessarily feel like you have an eating disorder, and you have days where you feel like you're nothing but your eating disorder. But I think allowing the ebb and flow has made it much easier to, I think on a day where I'm low on energy or I'm low on patience or whatever, I think I have a much stronger belief now that genuinely the next day might be different. You know, and that, it doesn't have to be a constant. Whereas, you know, on a bad day, I was like, well, that's it. That's my good run over. You know, I knew the mood would come back. Whereas now, there are days still where, you know, count down the hours and like, the day's still going. But I feel like I'm not working on the assumption of, oh God, and then I've got to do all of this again tomorrow and it's going to be just the same. It's like, well, just see how tomorrow goes. And that's been quite a big change for me. I was never a real kind of go with the flow person. And then there's a degree, you know, that I'll always be quite kind of, I like to be quite organised, I like a bit of routine, but I think it's definitely softened the edges of the rigidity.
What came up for me, Abby, was, you know, it can almost become something to chase in itself, can this idea of chasing the unattached motivation. But what if the unattached motivation and the attached motivation all come from the same place? What if the unattached motivation is sending you the attached motivation? What if it's all of it is coming from this wisdom in action, and you're just taking them as it's taking the little drip feeds as they come at a time. You know, I'm a dietitian, I use food a lot, but you know, it's taking each little sip of food as it comes at a time. It's like, okay, well, the motivation that's showing up for me like right now is in my children. Well, that's still coming from wisdom. It's still coming from wisdom.
It's definitely kind of, so like last weekend, it was both my little boys' birthdays on the Easter weekend, and you know, I think previous of their birthdays, I put an awful lot of pressure on myself, and we're like, right, it's got to be perfect for them, they've got to love it, it's got to be non-stop fun from dawn till dusk, and you know, they've always enjoyed their birthdays, but I've always felt like I then kind of was so stressed and exhausted that just the atmosphere there was just slightly full of pressure. And this time it was interesting because I thought, I'm just gonna, you know, like as my husband said to me, he said, they'll have fun whatever, like they're little, there are balloons, there's cake, like they honestly won't care what we do or don't do, like their requirements are very minimal at this stage. So just do what you want to do and don't do what you don't want to do and see how it goes. And so I did that basically. And we had a really nice day. And if I'd planned a week before what I thought that day would or should look like. It didn't look like that, but we all enjoyed it, and it was because, and I think it was because I was enjoying it, and that automatically led to everybody else being more relaxed. And I think that's when your inner and, yeah, as you say, your attached and your unattached motivation, they're one and the same thing.
Body and mind. Two sides of the same coin. Absolutely. We look at them as separate things, and yet they're all one system. It's all this. It's, we talk about it as separate because that's how our brains work. That's how our brains understand something. But let's go beyond it. Let's go through the separation. We get back to unity. Absolutely. Beautiful, Abby. Thank you so much for sharing that so generously.
So my question, I guess, is, as we've been talking, Jess and Sarah, about the understanding, we've talked a little bit about innate health and the diamond within. How would you describe, so I guess for me, like intellectually, it's hard to put a form around this understanding so much, but how would we point people to what it is we're pointing to? What do you think is the route into it?
Looking for a feeling beyond the words. Because the body and the mind are one system. We feel our thinking showing up in our body, and our body is this beautiful barometer that shows us how close to home, how close to the diamond, and how far away we are. That's all it's ever doing. It's saying, you're really far away right now, and I'm going to send it in this whole host of physical symptoms. Or you're really close right now, and that's showing up in a feeling. So look for a feeling. Look for a feeling. And it might be a really long time since you felt it. A really long time. And there may be a part of you that doubts you've ever felt it, but I guarantee that every single human being has. So it's look for the feeling where nothing else matters beyond the feeling. and get curious about what it might mean to keep looking for that and noticing that. Because what came up for me, Abby, when you were talking about your son's birthday party, was what changed was you enjoyed it. They probably could have enjoyed it without you enjoying it. Like, here's the really awful thing. Because they're feeling their thinking in the moment, and you're feeling yours. And when you had that thinking settle down, you had space to enjoy it. We don't know what thinking was going on in their minds, and that will have been fluctuating all the time. But it's like when we can notice the difference between the feeling when we're up in our head and up in our bodies to that place of calm, that place, that diamond, that when we recognize it, we know it. And when we get curious about looking for that feeling, it starts to show up more. I don't know. What about you, Sarah?
Well, I guess for me, this is much more of a spiritual understanding of humans, really, because and I don't think the NHS really likes that word very much, or some people don't, but the reality of our human experiences, we show up as humans, we have thought, we have bodies that we walk around and live our lives in, and there's something more. And I don't know what that something more is, because it doesn't have form. I can't feel it, touch it, see it. But I know it's what makes the blossom grow on the trees in the spring. It's what makes the snowdrops appear at the right time, in their right time. We don't get to design that. We might know the science behind what makes leaves and plants grow, but we don't know why. And it's for me, it's adding that extra element to our understanding of our experience, because without that, we're missing something vital. And if we only believe that we have thinking and that's our guide, well, How do trees exist? How do flowers grow? How do all of these things happen? Because they don't, I don't think, have thinking. You know, how do babies know to cry when they're hungry? How do they know to giggle? How do they know to look into their mother's eyes? You know, it's not something that we design as humans. It's something that's designed for us, you know, and it's that spiritual nature that I think is central to this understanding and trusting in what we don't know. And that's hard sometimes with eating disorders. Sorry, Jess.
No, I'm just saying, it was funny that you say that, because I found myself Googling what is proven innate in the world. And this sentence that came up on the Google search was, Homo sapiens are the only living creatures that are questioned whether or not innate qualities exist. And I thought, well, yes, because we ask the bloody questions. The answer is in that, isn't it? Like, how can it be that there are innate qualities in all of nature and not except for humans? Except that, and it's because we can't answer it. It's because the thinking mind cannot tangibly say this is true, and that's what it's looking to do all of the time. And I loved what you said about science. Like, once upon a time, I would have called myself a scientist. I'm a scientific thinker. You know, I studied pharmacology and physiology, and then I went off and did dietetics and nutrition, and I'm like, oh, that's who well, no, it's not. It's like science is the same, because all science is doing is asking questions. It observes something and then it asks a question to say, is this why that we observed it? And no, science is like 100% true. I think even at the moment, the disputing some of the stuff Einstein did, like, because it just grew. With the further you look, the more we see. I remember I was at university when the Human Genome Project was going on, and everyone was like, oh, this is going to be so big, we're going to map all the genes and then we're going to have all the answers. And a whole new world of science was born called epigenetics that didn't exist before we mapped the human genome. And it's like, no, like, we can keep fragmenting it, but it will fragment infinitely, because the truth is our thinking minds will never have all of the answers. And what you said just captured that beautifully. It's just getting comfortable in the essence of what we don't know, because that's where opportunities and possibility grows from. Yeah, like, we don't often want to have conversations about how much we don't know, but really we know a grain of sand. Not even that.
Am I allowed to say something?
Oh, please.
Oh no, Lucy, absolutely not. Of course.
I was just listening to Jess and Abby and you, Sarah. All the thing that's going in my head, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not anything, but just listening to it all, I'm thinking, you're all saying to me, in my language, the languages that I use, is that it's all acceptance. You know, we accept. I love the acorn and the tree, and I'm just going to laugh every time I see that now. Just thinking about that poor, does it want to grow into a tree or not? It's just accepting that it's going to do that, and that sort of like parking that thought process. And not worrying about it, just letting it be. Yeah. And that, I don't know, I was just thinking, right, it's just accepting. Yeah. And like, so Abby just accepting that, you know, today she's just going to enjoy the day. Bingo. And you did. Amazing.
Yeah.
But
being
motivated to take action from acceptance too. I think that's super important to point out here, because an acorn won't grow in sand. Like, that's why I still practice nutrition, right? Because like Abby, like, okay, yeah, this wisdom is existing, but it needs feeding. Like an acorn may stay an acorn if it hasn't got that, you know, the things around it in order to the essence, the wisdom is there. Nobody can take that wisdom away from it. That wisdom can't be broken. And yet, whether or not it grows, like, not every acorn has grown into an oak tree, because so it wouldn't grow in sand. So it's like we need to take action from that acceptance too.
And that's also acceptance, isn't it? That actually whatever happens to the acorn is what happens to the acorn. It's not for us to make it grow or to stop it growing or to be sad if it doesn't grow. It's knowing that there's a bigger plan beyond what our little minds can know, and it's trusting that bigger plan, and accepting that, yeah, we don't need to know and we don't need to make it so. I mean, if you're in the middle of the ocean in a rowing boat with a couple of oars, you're gonna, you know, it'd be wise to use the oars to try and get to land. You're not going to just wait for the tide and hope for the best. But also, you know, there is a sense that, yeah, row as much as you can, but there's a bigger plan at work.
Yeah, it's like the metaphor that jumped to mind, I'll be really quick, was like, it's like a bird clinging to a fence in the wind. It's like it doesn't know where the wind's going to take it, but it can cling and cling and cling and cling and cling and cling, or it can open its wings.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, I don't know, I was just thinking there that, you know, if I am this little acorn, that, you know, obviously, yeah, so you need to nourish that for it to grow, and if you don't nourish it, it'll sort of stay the same. But for me, I think realizing that my eating disorder behaviors were actively stopping it growing, literally and metaphorically. So you've got the kind of almost like the 3 stages. And I think early in recovery, I was ready to sort of change the behaviors that were actively stopping me growing. And then when I was talking about that stage where I was like, I felt like I was doing fine and it wasn't really impacting anyone else, and I could have lived an okay life like that. I wouldn't, you know, that's kind of once taken away the actively stopping it growing, there's that point. And I think now it's that really trying to nourish it, not just, you know, physically, but in every way, so that you can encourage that growth. And I think, yeah, I don't know, I think to bring it back to eating disorders, whether or not they exist, you know, the behaviors do, and so for me, rather than sort of like, I'm going to fight the behaviors, because there's a lot of, in treatment and just generally in kind of, so social media and everything else, there's a lot of battle talk around eating disorders. You've got to fight it, you've got to challenge it, you've got to blah, blah, blah. And obviously there is a bit of that, you know, you have got to actively choose to kind of go against your thinking sometimes, but there's much less of the, other than the literal you've got to eat, there's much less of the nourishing language, the kind of, yeah, I don't know, I think, and for me I found that much more effective, because battles and fighting and everything else, it's absolutely exhausting to do that day in, day out. I just didn't have it in me. No. And so then when you get to kind of let it be stage, you know, I settled there for a while and just sort of got curious. And I think from there, you then get the kind of nourishing it, boosting it, doing the things that honor you. And I think, yeah, that was definitely a bit of a process for me, stepping away from the kind of the vision of me just battling something, and rather than battling something, it was nourishing me, the parts of me that were there when I was a baby and when I knew how to, you know, cry for, you know, that, and it sounds really basic and really simple. Obviously it's not that straightforward, but I think for me that's made a big difference, that shift.
It's never made sense to me to do battle, because an eating disorder is part of our thinking. So we're battling with our minds, you know. Why would we do that? It just doesn't make sense to create an inner battle, inner compassion, inner warmth, inner love, inner acceptance of where our thinking's at, and still no, that's not who we are. It's not how we have to be.
And I think it's that the acceptance that, you know, there'll be times where you need help. Like you don't have to do it on your own. Like oak trees would be extinct if it wasn't for a certain species of bird. I think it might even just be a blackbird. Like there is a species of bird that is responsible for planting acorns to their optimum place for, like, they look like they're making a right mess, but they need to dig it right in and get it down to make it land on fertile ground. And like without this species of bird, an oak tree would never grow from an acorn. So it's like seeing yourself as connected to all of it, including the help that is out there too, because I think that we can fall into this story very easily. I've got this wisdom and I should be able to do it on my own, but anytime there's a should there, it's a warning sign, because, you know, it's all part of it, isn't it? So it's just, yeah,
it's all part of the grand design.
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing in that conversation is, you know, the way in to kind of get to that settled place. It's almost letting go of having to try to figure it out all the time. It's our little minds that want to keep thinking about stuff because we're panicking that we don't want to trust something of the unknown. So it's almost kind of inviting the unknown in, isn't it? And as a feeling that is familiar to us, because we're all searching for nice feelings. And I think what I uncovered was that nice feeling in myself, but also not necessarily having to kind of work out what everybody's thinking anymore, but just the fact that people think. The nature of thought has helped me know that whoever I meet with now, whether it's someone with an eating disorder or anxiety or depression, I've seen now for my own mind, and I see that other people, all they can ever have, the only problem is that they're busy in their heads with a lot of insecure thinking. And it's helping them reach that state of meditation, not by meditating or trying to look for it outside, but just it's in a natural state of meditation in us that we fall into all the time, but we just don't realize it. And then it's in those moments when your mind is quiet, silent, that you feel good. And from that place of clarity, ideas arise, answers arise. And it's so simple, isn't it? And people say it can't be that simple. It's too simple. You're insulting my intelligence. So you go, hang on a minute, I've got to think about this. And then you're off again for your next quest. Totally you play the game of life in this way all the time. And that's okay. Till you fall away from it again and then go, oh, I was playing with my thinking again.
Ebb and flow.
Does anybody have any reflections, any questions?
That keeps coming up for me.
Hi, Shirley.
Hi, can you hear me?
Just about, we can just about hear you.
I'm Liz Mira. There's a quotation that's kept coming into my head when various people have been speaking. I think it was Cozzolino who said it. We're not the survival of the fittest, we're the survival of the nurtured. And that really resonates, that it's not always about striving, fighting, battling. It is about the nourishment and the nurture, whether you're looking at the acorn or about human beings. And that's what's come up a lot tonight. I love that quotation.
That's beautiful, Shirley.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I hear that. We're not it's not about the survival of the fittest.
We're not the survival of the fittest, we're the survival of the nurtured.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect.
Absolutely. We nourish ourselves with so much more than food.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But food's fairly important too.
And it's so important, and it makes total sense that it shows up as a way to help us to get back to a feeling, because it changes our biology, it changes our feeling state. So it's like, again, it's no one who's gone down the route, like, not that they've chosen it, but no one who's gone down the path of eating disorder for whatever's happened has done it because there's anything wrong with them. You know, like at some point it makes perfect sense. And and then it won't.
Yeah. And at the time it did, and that was wisdom in action, trying to get through a tricky period of their lives. And it got them through, but it's not what's getting them through anymore.
Yeah, and what if they actually got through despite it, not because of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful quote, that, Shirley. I'm going to pinch that.
Yeah.
Not mine, Cozzolino.
I'll be Googling it.
Jess, it's been so wonderful to have you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's been so lovely. I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And 6th of May is the next one, and we have got Amy Johnson, Dr. Amy Johnson, coming to join us. So if you can, come and listen to Amy, because she's nearly as good as Jess.